Yesterday, Pac-12 Commissioner George Kalaikov met with Pac-12 athletic directors and executives to discuss a new media rights deal with Apple Television that primarily focuses on streaming. The last-ditch effort to stop the bleeding by Commissioner George Kalaikov is shameful. And why is it shameful? Well, according to Pete Thamel, the deal would have incentivized tiers, which would give it strong upside if certain subscription numbers are met, also known as this will be a pay-per-subscription / pay-per-view service, which is shameful and is in fact pathetic because USC, UCLA, and Colorado, which would constitute of some of the Pac-12's larger fan bases, are already out the door. Colorado, I know, hasn't had a large fan base in quite some time, but Deion Sanders is a magnet. He's going to attract a lot of views from Colorado fans and college football fans alike, and Colorado's already going to rejoin the Big 12 in 2024. USC and UCLA, who took up the Los Angeles market, they're going to be in the Big 10 now. The Pac-12 is down to 9 teams after this year. Oregon, Oregon State, Washington, Washington State, Utah, Arizona, Arizona State, and then California and Stanford. USC, UCLA, and Colorado are already gone, and it looks like Arizona is about to exit the door as well, potentially taking Arizona State and Utah with them, likely to the Big 12. So this pay-per-view plan, as SportsIllustrated.com puts it, is ludicrous, and I'm going to be reading and or gathering information from several articles in today's video, and I'm going to link them all down below. Because conference realignment is here. It was never going to end after USC and UCLA joined the Big 10. It was never going to leave after Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC. It was just the start. And in my opinion, conference realignment has claimed its first Power 5 victim. Its first, and likely not its only, because the ACC will potentially be next, and potentially the Big 12 will fall victim to this as well, if the ACC and the Big 12 don't grow and don't compete with the SEC and Big 10, which they likely won't, but we never know. Those conferences have at least found ways to tread water, the Big 12, and if they add Utah and the Arizona schools and maybe Gonzaga to build a basketball super conference, maybe they can turn losing Texas and Oklahoma, maybe they can turn that into some kind of gain, which sounds weird to say, but it could be true. What Brett Yormark is doing right now as an aggressor and is modernizing the conference, I think is working wonders. And the ACC, if they can somehow break that grant of rights deal and restructure something much better. Clemson's had success in the playoff. Florida State's had success at a national level. Miami's a big brand. But still, it looks like there's going to be a Power 2 system and maybe a Little 1 or Little 2 with the Big 12 and maybe ACC surviving in the near future. The Big 10 and SEC just have such a strong advantage and lead over everyone else in terms of yearly revenue and TV rights and also performance on the field. And it's sad to say, but I think the Pac-12 is dead, getting back to the Pac-12 conference. They're going to have some really good football this year. They're going to have some of the nation's most explosive teams. They're going to have some of the nation's more elite teams as well. That might be a bold prediction. I have Washington making the college football playoff. I think Utah is a top 10 team. I think Oregon State, Oregon, and USC are top 15, potentially top 10 teams, and UCLA and Washington State could contend to be top 25 teams. However, due to their poor media rights deal prior to the one they're talking about right now, and due to the fact that the conference has performed poorly on a national level since around the mid-2010s, I think it's too late to save the conference. The Pac-12 will cease to exist as a Power 5 conference after this season, and I'm going to go on a longer limb and say the conference will cease to exist altogether after 2023. There will be no Pac-12. No Pac-12 in 2024. That's my bold prediction. And I think there are many reasons as to why this is. Number one, the new TV media rights deal hasn't even been accepted yet. It's been delayed for months, maybe you could say even years. It's been delayed. And what George Kalaikov is doing is not working. Period. Amen. And Colorado's already gone. USC and UCLA are already gone to the Big Ten. I'm expecting that Washington and Oregon will make a move to the Big Ten rather soon. And Oregon State, Washington State, California, Stanford, to a certain degree, even Utah and Arizona State, we don't know exactly where they will end up. But it's looking pretty clear that Arizona will be moving to the Big 12. And the Big 12, just from a geographical standpoint, and from the standpoint that Colorado and soon-to-be Arizona will be in the Big 12, most likely, it would make sense that Utah and or at least Arizona State would move with Arizona and Colorado to the Big 12, which would bring the Big 12 to 16 teams entering 2024. If they do leave, if just Arizona leaves, it would bring the conference to 14 teams. So I think the Big 12 right now is winning while it still can. We'll see if in the long term, in the decades that follows this new name, image, and likeness, transfer portal, and streaming services era, we'll see if they can continue to win. But right now, they're winning. We got to give the Big 12 credit. The Big 10, I think, will end up being the biggest winner of the Pac-12's death. They already got USC, UCLA. I anticipate that they will be making a move potentially not just for Oregon and Washington, but perhaps for more schools, as Stanford, California, and Utah are AAU schools. Arizona State is as well, but I don't think the Big Ten would be interested in Arizona. But maybe I'm wrong there. I'm far from an insider on any conference or the media rights stuff. I'm just talking about what I see, what I can put together, and what I can gather is the Pac-12, the Pacific Coast Conference, is dead. There is no saving it, short of an absolute miracle. Let's first read an article on SportsIllustrated.com talking about how the Pac-12 streaming deal is bad for business. We will mention other articles too. I want to talk about the Pac-12 and what the outlook is for all the schools that are still within the conference, the 9 remaining schools, and also talk about the Big Ten and how the Big Ten is impacted by this, because I think the Big Ten has a massive opportunity presenting itself right now to potentially be the first conference to reach 20 teams, to become the first quote-unquote super conference. Or maybe 16 teams is already a super conference, so maybe an ultra conference? I don't know. But anyway, the Pac-12 is on the clock, writes SportsIllustrated.com. This article is written by Buffs Beat staff. It's a Buffs Beat article, a Colorado fan page. The Pac-12 is on the clock. As of Tuesday, the conference passed along a stripped-down media rights deal with Apple TV and primarily focuses on streaming. The last-ditch effort to stop the bleeding by Commissioner George Kalaikov is shameful. It's not a proposal focused on growth and doesn't give a linear approach, which hurts exposure efforts to the schools willing to stick around. In theory, the deal is forward-thinking with some digital advancements. However, it's not solely guaranteed money with quote-unquote incentivized tiers, which means if viewership is poor, guess what happens? This deal is flushed down the toilet. And with large fan bases, as I've mentioned before, like USC leaving, fan bases that have potential for serious growth, like Colorado, they're off to the Big 12. And Oregon, Dan Lanning and Josh Pate talked about this on his Late Kick podcast. Dan Lanning signed a deal with Oregon that says if he wants to leave Oregon in the next few years, I forget how long exactly the contract is, he has to pay Oregon $20 million to leave. So he's secure with Oregon's future. That's what that deal tells you. So I think he knows either that Oregon is safe within the Pac-12, or more likely that Oregon is already making calculated moves to escape what seems to be a disaster. It would be worth a lot if certain subscription numbers are met, but only that. And let's face it, the pay-per-view plan is ludicrous, to say the least, writes this article. There's an underlying shift in the media market that's happening, and we're long-term taking advantage of that, Kalaikov said at Pac-12 Media Day. Commissioner Kalaikov is engaging in dishonest optimism here, and the reason he's doing that is because there's nothing to be optimistic about. Apple TV's growth has slowed down over the past 6 months. Colorado, USC, and UCLA are already leaving the conference, and the Pac-12 After Dark kickoffs and refusal to cooperate with cable networks and other streaming services are acts that are crowbarring the conference in the kneecaps. There's nothing to be optimistic about. This deal is a last-ditch effort to save the conference, a conference who has kicked the can down the hill for years and for months. And now they're reaping the consequences of that because no school should or would want to stick around to wait and see what the consequences of kicking the hill down the road are. Why would you? You want security. You also want growth along with that security. The Pac-12 cannot provide growth or security, period, amen. The Big Ten and the SEC provide both growth and security. The ACC, very poor with growth, but they do have security with that grant of rights deal. And the Big 12, they're definitely more secure, and with Brett Yormark's aggressive approach, they do have a growth mindset to them. And they're more secure than the Pac-12, as I mentioned a few seconds ago. The Pac-12 right now has the biggest set of disadvantages out of all of the Power 5 conferences. Why would you want to be a part of the Pac-12 conference? You wouldn't, unless you're a group of 5 school, and by joining the Pac-12, you would get more money and you'd get a larger media rights package and reap more benefits. But if you're a current Power 5 school, if you're a Washington, an Oregon, a Utah, even an Arizona State or a Stanford, like a school that matters in the realm of football, or heck, any school in the Pac-12 outside of maybe California, Stanford, Oregon State, Washington State, smaller schools whose history of success in college football isn't exactly large or even above average, but nonetheless they're a Power 5 team. Even those 4 schools, do you think they really want to stay with the Pac-12 when they look at things through a realistic lens, seeing the conference crumble around them? Probably not. So I think that, and the TV deal, and the lack of stability, the lack of growth, the reported revenue per school from the TV deal is going to be less than the $31 million that Colorado will be receiving in 2024, far less than USC, UCLA, and the Big Ten, or Texas and Oklahoma and the SEC. The Pac-12 is just in a really bad place right now, in a really bad place. Arizona is rumored to be joining the Big 12 soon. Colorado's already joining the Big 12 in 2024. However, Arizona reportedly wants Arizona State and Utah to depart with them. Those are just reports. We don't know if that is going to be true. But Arizona definitely has options. I think Washington and Oregon and even Utah, just off of their recent success in football, and for Oregon and Washington especially, their big names, I think they have options. I'm going to read another Sports Illustrated article talking about the Pac-12 schools remaining who aren't leaving, like Colorado, USC, UCLA, the remaining Pac-12 schools, and this article ranks them by who needs the conference to stay together the most. Consequentially, which schools have the most options and which schools have little to no options. So, first and foremost, the schools that have little to no options, Oregon State and Washington State. Every realignment scenario that involves the Pac-12 dissolving, these 2 programs are left out by other conferences. Now, I think the Big 12, maybe if you just want to get a collection of bodies in and want the conference to be larger and have a larger footprint, Oregon State and Washington State could work. The Big 12 is eyeing the remaining four corner schools, and the Big 10 may not even want Oregon and Washington, who are the biggest brands of the conference. As a Michigan fan and a Big 10 fan myself, I want the Big 10 to grab up Oregon and Washington. I think it would be an asinine idea not to pick them off. What could happen to Oregon State and Washington State, however, is an unfortunate aspect of this phase of realignment because we don't know what could happen to them. We don't know where they will go. Maybe they go down to the group of five, or maybe the Big 12 picks them up. We'll see. Or maybe I don't know. And that's an honest answer. I don't know what happens to Oregon State and Washington State. I'd say they either join the Big 12 or they go down to the group of five. Most likely, they probably couldn't survive as an independent. In fact, they definitely wouldn't survive as an independent. And the Big 10 won't want Oregon State or Washington State because they're not big brands and they're not AAU schools. Other schools that have more options would be California, Stanford, Utah, and Arizona State. Now, what all four of those schools have in common, unlike the previous two, is they are AAU schools. So technically, they would be eligible to join the Big 10, as the Big 10 has a preference for AAU universities. Cal, Stanford, Utah, and Arizona State. The latter two, Utah and ASU, are looking to join the Big 12. Cal and Stanford, they could join the Big 12. They could go down to the group of five. They also, because of their AAU status, could join the Big 10. Stanford and Cal have rivalries with UCLA and USC, so that would be a nice partnership to make sure that USC and UCLA aren't left alone on the West Coast in the Big 10. Obviously, Utah and Arizona are among the four corner schools, but the Big 12 is rumored to have just one spot open unless they figure something else out. If the money aspect is squared away, then those two would likely love to jump to the Big 12 if needed. Stanford and Cal have been a mystery as long as they've been viewed for candidates for the Big 10, but there really hasn't been concrete proof that if things go bad, they will end up in the Big 10. Stanford has long been viewed as a strong enough brand to be independent, but the amount of money they'd lose in doing so would be huge. And then lastly, Oregon, Washington, and Arizona. Oregon and Washington are the biggest brands in the conference. They'll either go to the Big 12 or Big 10. We don't even need to read the articles talk about them. They have all the options in the world. Heck, if the SEC wants them, could probably go to the SEC. It would make as much geographical sense as USC and UCLA moving to the Big 10 anyway. Arizona is clearly next in line for the Big 12. The Big 12, with their proposals with Gonzaga in basketball, it's clear that the Big 12 wants to at least be a super conference in basketball, and adding Arizona, not Arizona State, but adding Arizona would certainly work for that. The Pac-12's rumored TV deal is pathetic compared to those in the SEC and the Big 10. We know this. The SEC and the Big 10 are going to be making well over $50 million. Every school will be making well over $50 million per year. You could probably bump that up and say they'll be making well over $60 million per year. Meanwhile, from an article that I saw, I don't know if this is true or not, but the Pac-12's TV deal, the payout will be around $25 million per school. So the Big 10 and the SEC, Vanderbilt, Northwestern will be making more than double of what Oregon, for example, would be making under this new rumored TV deal if the payouts per schools are equal, which I expect them to be. That's pathetic. Bigger schools are not going to put up with that, like Oregon, Washington. I don't think Stanford would even put up with that. You know, if Notre Dame joins the Big 10, plus with USC and UCLA joining the Big 10, Stanford would have tons of rivalries. It would, at that point, make sense for Stanford to join the Big 10. The Big 10 also has academic importance as a priority, unlike the SEC, Northwestern being in there, and teams having to have AAU status practically to join the Big 10. I think the Pac-12, as I've already stated, will either collapse or become a group of five conference after this year. I'm leaning toward the former option. I think the conference is going to be non-existent after this year. The TV rights deal has come too late. Oregon and Washington, it seems like their athletic departments and their head coaches and Executives are confident about those schools' futures, and that tells me, just with the state of chaos that the Pac 12 is in, that those schools will be making moves shortly, potentially within the next week. And this is where Big Ten expansion comes in. We know that the Big 12 already poached Colorado. They're looking at the Four Corner schools, and Arizona will likely be joining them soon, potentially Arizona State, maybe Utah. We know this from the Big 12. The Big 12, as much as I want to talk about them more, especially since I think once Texas and Oklahoma leave, they're still going to find ways to be innovative, entertaining, and maybe they can somehow miraculously grab a national championship. TCU reached the national championship game last year. Colorado under Deion Sanders is strong, both in fan support now. They're going to be strong in NIL. By hiring Sanders, they're throwing everything at college football. And Charles Kelly, their defensive coordinator, made comparisons between Deion Sanders and Nick Saban. Outside of TCU, Kansas is rising under Lance Leipold, and Kansas State has a great head coach in Chris Kleeman, and Baylor has Dave Aranda, and UCF with Gus Malzahn, they've been recruiting at a good level, so there's potential for that Big 12 conference to perform well and also to have growth in terms of money, TV and media rights, and on-field performance and competitiveness within the conference, as there will no longer be this, heavy-weighted hierarchy like there are in most Power 5 conferences. With Oklahoma and Texas leaving, there's going to be more parity in the Big 12. It might be the most entertaining conference, or at least most competitive conference to watch after this season going forward in the expanded playoff era. But I want to talk about the Big 10, most importantly, because I think the Big 10 will add Washington and Oregon, and they will play in the 2024 season. Maybe that's unrealistic. Maybe that's a premature prediction. The Big 10 just released their 2024 conference schedules. However, why wouldn't you add Washington and Oregon? I don't know why the Big 10 wouldn't go after them at this point. It'll give them an edge over the SEC, that's for sure, because they'll have two more teams, and Oregon and Washington are name brands. It would help make the schedules make more sense. There'd be less traveling all around, and USC and UCLA wouldn't be left alone. And there's already rumors that Washington and Oregon are set to join the Big 10 sometime this week or in the month of August, and they'll make a formal announcement. Whether those rumors are true or not, they're still out there, and they're coming from reported credible sources. I would also prefer the Big 10 to add Utah, California, Stanford, and Notre Dame. Utah, they're an AAU school, and they've had success under Kyle Whittingham. That also helps branch, let's say, Nebraska, who previously was the westernmost Big 10 team. It helps give a stretch from, it lessens the distance between, let's say, Nebraska and then the next closest team, which would be USC. It kind of puts a middle ground team in the Mountain West time zone. And that way the Big 10 would cover, I think, all four time zones in the lower 48 states by adding Utah. And then California and Stanford on top of Washington and Oregon, I think that would be incredible. I think that California, Stanford, Utah, Washington, Oregon, that right there would put 7 former Pac-12 teams in the Big 10, plus Notre Dame, who just makes sense geographically. They play like a Big 10 program. They're a blue blood. That would put, in total, the Big 10 at 22 teams if all those teams join. However, I think it's more realistic that just Washington and Oregon join, and maybe 1 or 2 of the schools that I have listed as preferred new members. Clemson and Florida State are also reportedly going to join the Big 10 this week. However, I don't think the ACC breaks apart just yet. It sounds like the grant of rights deal is pretty ironclad, and although it wouldn't surprise me, because USC, UCLA, that was surprising, same with Texas and Oklahoma, it is possible, and not much would surprise me anymore. I mean, Clemson and Florida State, they're in a bad place revenue and growth-wise with the ACC. Utah is rumored to be in talks with the Big 12 along with Arizona and Arizona State as well. I didn't want to brush over that fact. But going back to the ACC, look, Miami got AAU status. Florida State and Clemson right now are the two best programs in that conference. If the ACC breaks apart, there are going to be several schools in the ACC, potentially half, if not more than half of those schools would probably be undesirable additions by either the SEC or the Big Ten. I don't see Boston College going anywhere. I don't see Syracuse going anywhere. I'm hard-pressed to see Wake Forest find a destination, for example. Pittsburgh, similar story. Where do they end up? What about Virginia? Virginia Tech? I mean, Virginia Tech, very successful program, but they've fallen in recent years. Are they that desirable anymore? Who knows? What about NC State? North Carolina and Duke are good for basketball, but with conference realignment, college football is going to be driving that because they earn so much more revenue from the sport of football than universities do through the sport of basketball. So there's a lot that's unknown. Certainly college football is moving in a new direction, and it's moving in that direction rather quickly. But I don't think the ACC breaks apart just yet, and I think the Big 12 is finding a way to stay stable. Greg Sankey claims that the SEC isn't looking to expand past 16, but I don't know if I take his word for that, and if I do, it's certainly a temporary plan. The Big 10, similar things are coming out of the Big 10, but I think with the Pac-12 breaking apart and plenty of Pac-12 teams just fit the Big Ten's desired goal of having good academic standards while also being name brand powerful football teams, I think there's just too much to lose by not taking advantage of the Pac-12's chaos if you're the Big Ten. So I think Washington and Oregon sometime this month will announce, and this prediction will either age very poorly or age very well. I think they will announce that they're joining the Big Ten Conference in either 2024 or 2025. They'll announce that. Clemson, Florida State, I don't think they're going to be joining the Big Ten this week or this month, but maybe, just maybe they are. According to an article by athlonsports.com, Scoop City received a serious rumor that the Big Ten will add Washington, Oregon, Florida State, and Clemson this week. Oregon and Washington have been rumored to the Big Ten for a while, over the past year, but the rumors died down recently. However, Colorado's abrupt exit to the Big 12 has reopened the door. The expectation is that the Pac-12 is done, with schools like Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah likely headed to the Big 12. Oregon and Washington need a new home, and it just logically makes sense that they belong in the Big 10. Clemson and Florida State make more sense for the SEC, writes Athlon Sports. However, they could join the Big 10 as well. If the Big 10 enters Florida, their market dominance would be undefeated, having a market in LA, taking up the entire Midwest and much of the Northeast, with Rutgers, and then taking up Florida. And if they get Washington and Oregon, they get the Seattle and Eugene markets. So all in all, the Big 10, there's too much to lose for you to not get involved if you're the Big 10 and the Big 10 commissioner. So all in all, I think that Washington, Oregon, maybe a handful of other schools will join the Big 10 rather soon. I do think that it'll be more than just Arizona who will join the Big 12. I think if you're the Big 12, you have to take what you can get with Arizona State, and especially Utah. Getting Utah would be a huge win for the Big 12. I'd love for the Big 10 to get Utah, but if the Big 10 doesn't want Utah, they'd fit perfectly in the Big 12 with Colorado being there and with Arizona and likely Arizona State being in the Big 12 starting in 2024 as well. So that's just my thoughts on conference expansion, conference realignment, and what's happening in the world of college football when it comes to off-the-field issues. I do think the Pac-12 is absolutely done for, at least at the Power 5 level. However, I think it's more likely that the Pac-12 will cease to exist after the 2023 season. It's sad because I think that there are 5 teams in the Pac-12 that have top 10 potential. I think that Washington, Utah, Oregon, USC, Oregon State have the potential to play for a national championship. Yes, I think the Pac-12 conference is that deep. They'll likely all beat up on each other, and I think that one school or no schools will reach the college football playoff from the Pac-12. I pick Washington to do it. But all in all, the conference is very strong, especially at quarterback. They have some of the best offenses in the country. But because they kicked the can, they procrastinated, and they didn't adapt to the times, it's going to bite the conference in the butt. So that's a lesson both in the college football world and also in life. Don't procrastinate. Pounce on an opportunity when you see it, and work smart. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, and comment your thoughts on the Pac-12 down below. See you guys later.